The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his rifle scope one final time. His SEAL team had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks through some of the most dangerous territory in the region. Intelligence reports indicated that Khalil Rahman, a notorious bomb maker responsible for multiple attacks on coalition forces, was hiding in a compound nestled between 2 steep cliffs about 2 miles ahead. Morrison's team consisted of 5 experienced operators. There was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez, a demolitions expert whose steady hands could disarm any explosive device known to man. Petty Officer First Class David Ghost Chen specialized in reconnaissance and could move through enemy territory like a shadow. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Bulldog Williams handled communications and had saved their lives more times than anyone could count with his quick thinking. Finally, there was Petty Officer Third Class Alex Rookie Thompson, the youngest member of the team but already proving himself as a capable sniper. The mission seemed straightforward enough. They would approach the compound under cover of darkness, neutralize any guards, capture Rahman alive if possible, and extract with minimal casualties. What they didn't know was that Rahman had been expecting them. For the past week, local informants had been feeding him information about American movements in the area. He had set up an elaborate trap that would turn their routine capture mission into a fight for survival. As the team moved through the narrow mountain pass, Ghost suddenly raised his fist, signaling everyone to stop. Through his binoculars, he spotted movement on the ridgeline above them. It wasn't the random movement of goats or wildlife. These were deliberate, coordinated movements of armed men taking positions. Morrison quickly assessed the situation. They were in a natural bottleneck with steep, rocky walls on both sides rising at least 60 feet high. Behind them, the path narrowed even further before opening up into the valley they had just crossed. Ahead, the passage continued for about 300 yards before reaching the target compound. If enemies were positioned on the heights above them, retreat would be just as dangerous as moving forward. Tank crawled up beside Morrison and whispered urgently into his ear. He had spotted muzzle flashes reflecting sunlight from at least 6 different positions on the eastern cliff face. Williams, monitoring radio chatter through his encrypted communications device, confirmed their worst fears. He was picking up enemy transmissions in Pashto, and from what he could understand, they were surrounded. The first shots came without warning. Automatic rifle fire erupted from multiple positions above them, sending chunks of rock and dirt flying in all directions. The team immediately took cover behind whatever natural protection they could find. But the rocky terrain offered limited options. Morrison dove behind a large boulder just as bullets sparked off the stone inches from his head. Rookie Thompson had managed to find a position that gave him some protection while still allowing him to return fire. He aimed his rifle toward the eastern cliff and began engaging targets, but the enemy had superior positioning and better cover. Every time one of the SEALs tried to move, concentrated fire would pin them down again. Ghost attempted to flank around to the western side of the passage, hoping to find a way up the cliff face to take out some of the enemy positions from behind. But as soon as he left cover, a sniper's bullet struck the ground right next to his feet. Another shooter was positioned somewhere on the western cliff as well, covering any escape route in that direction. For 20 minutes, the firefight continued with neither side gaining a clear advantage. The SEALs were pinned down but not taking casualties due to their superior training and the limited cover they had managed to find. However, their ammunition was running low, and they had no way to call for backup. Williams had tried repeatedly to establish communication with their base, but the mountains were blocking his radio signals. Morrison realized they were in serious trouble. The enemy wasn't just randomly shooting at them. This was a well-planned ambush with overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. Someone had studied their tactics and knew exactly how special operations teams would react in this type of situation. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the temperature began to rise dramatically. The team was running low on water as well as ammunition. Tank had counted his remaining magazines and estimated they had maybe 30 minutes of sustained firefight left before they would be reduced to pistols in hand, grenades. The enemy seemed to understand this as well. The rate of incoming fire had decreased slightly, suggesting they were content to wait and let the Americans exhaust their resources. Occasionally, A single shot would ring out to remind the SEALs that they were still being watched. But the intense barrage from earlier had settled into a more methodical siege. Morrison was studying the cliff faces through his scope, trying to identify individual enemy positions when something caught his attention. About 400 yards ahead, near the target compound, he noticed a strange reflection coming from what appeared to be a natural cave opening in the northern cliff face. It wasn't the metallic reflection of a weapon or scope. This was different, almost like sunlight hitting glass or crystal. He pointed it out to Rookie Thompson, who adjusted his own scope to get a better look. Neither of them could make sense of what they were seeing. The cave opening appeared to be partially hidden behind loose rocks and scrub brush, and whatever was causing the reflection seemed to be moving slightly, as if someone or something was shifting position inside. As Morrison continued to observe the mysterious cave, he began to notice that the enemy fire patterns seemed to avoid that particular area of the cliff face. It was as if they knew something was there and didn't want to accidentally engage it. This observation would prove to be more important than any of them could have imagined. The heat became unbearable as noon approached. Tank's uniform was soaked with sweat, and he could see that the rest of the team was suffering from the same problem. They had been pinned down for over 2 hours now, and their water supplies were running dangerously low. Morrison knew they had to make a decision soon or risk becoming casualties from dehydration rather than enemy fire. Williams had managed to establish brief contact with their forward operating base, but the transmission was full of static and kept cutting out. He was able to relay their GPS coordinates and situation before losing the signal completely. However, even if reinforcements were dispatched immediately, it would take several hours for help to arrive through the treacherous mountain terrain. Ghost had been studying the cliff faces methodically, trying to identify the exact number and positions of enemy shooters. He estimated at least 8 to 10 fighters were positioned on the eastern cliff, with possibly 3 or 4 more on the western side. What concerned him most was that these weren't untrained militia fighters. Their discipline and coordination suggested they were experienced combatants, possibly former military or well-trained insurgents. The enemy had also demonstrated remarkable patience. Most amateur fighters would have either charged their position by now or gotten bored and left. These men were content to wait, suggesting they had received orders to keep the Americans pinned down until additional forces could arrive to finish them off. Rookie Thompson had been taking careful shots whenever he could identify a target, but the enemy positions were well concealed and protected by natural rock formations. He had managed to score at least 2 hits based on the screams and angry shouting that followed his shots, but he couldn't confirm any kills. More importantly, his actions seemed to anger the enemy enough that they increased their rate of fire, making movement even more dangerous for his teammates. Morrison continued to observe the mysterious cave opening through his scope. The strange reflections had stopped, but he was certain someone was inside. What puzzled him was why the enemy fighters seemed to be avoiding that area. During the entire firefight, he hadn't seen a single muzzle flash from anywhere near that cave, despite it being an excellent position for engaging targets in the pass below. As he watched, Morrison noticed a small movement in the shadows just inside the cave opening. It was barely visible, but his trained eye caught the slight shift that indicated human presence. Someone was definitely in there, and they were being very careful to remain hidden. The question was whether this person was friend or foe. Tank crawled over to Morrison's position, staying low to avoid sniper fire. His face was grim as he delivered bad news about their ammunition situation. By his count, the team had maybe 20 minutes of sustained fighting capability left. After that, they would be down to their sidearms and whatever explosives he carried in his pack. The demolitions expert suggested they consider using some of his C4 charges to try to bring down part of the cliff face and block the enemy's line of sight. It was a desperate plan that could easily backfire if they brought down rocks on their own positions, but it might create enough confusion to allow them to escape toward the compound. Morrison was considering this option when Ghost suddenly pointed toward the eastern cliff face. One of the enemy fighters had made a mistake and exposed too much of himself while trying to get a better angle on Thompson's position. The sniper was partially visible behind a large rock formation, and for just a moment, he presented a clear target. Before Thompson could take the shot, a single rifle crack echoed from somewhere ahead of their position. The exposed enemy fighter suddenly jerked backward and disappeared from view. The shot had come from the direction of the mysterious cave, and it had been perfectly placed to take out the sniper without endangering the SEALs below. The enemy fighters immediately began shouting in confused voices. They had heard the shot, but they couldn't identify where it had come from. Their attention shifted from the pinned Americans to searching for this new threat. Several of them began firing randomly toward the northern cliff face, but their shots were hitting empty rock far from the actual cave position. Morrison realized that whoever was in that cave had just saved Thompson's life, and possibly given them their first real advantage since the ambush began. The enemy was now dealing with threats from two different directions, which would split their attention and reduce the concentrated fire that had been keeping the SEALs pinned down. Williams took advantage of the confusion to move to a better position closer to the western cliff face. As he moved, another shot rang out from the cave. This time, Morrison was watching through his scope and saw the muzzle flash. The hidden shooter had taken out another enemy fighter, who had been trying to get a clear shot at Williams. The enemy response was immediate and violent. They began concentrating heavy fire toward the cave area, but their shots were poorly aimed due to panic and confusion. Whoever was in that cave had found an extremely well-protected position that offered excellent fields of fire while remaining nearly impossible to hit from the enemy positions. Tank seized the opportunity created by the distraction. He pulled the pin on a grenade and threw it toward a cluster of rocks where he had seen muzzle flashes earlier. The explosion sent debris flying and caused several enemy fighters to temporarily cease fire as they took cover from the falling stones. Ghost used the momentary lull to sprint toward a better position near the base of the eastern cliff. His goal was to climb up and try to reach some of the enemy positions from below, where they wouldn't expect an attack. It was incredibly dangerous, but the hidden sniper's intervention had given them their first real chance to take offensive action. As Ghost began his climb, the hidden shooter provided covering fire with precise, well-timed shots that forced the enemy to keep their heads down. Morrison watched in amazement as shot after shot found its mark or came close enough to make the enemy fighters dive for cover. This person, whoever they were, was an exceptional marksman with an intimate knowledge of the terrain. The tide of the battle was beginning to turn, but Morrison knew they weren't out of danger yet. The enemy still had superior numbers and positions, and they would eventually figure out how to coordinate their response to deal with threats from multiple directions. The SEALs needed to press their advantage quickly before the enemy regrouped and adapted to the new situation. Ghost moved like his nickname suggested, using every shadow and rock formation to mask his approach to the cliff face. The hidden sniper continued to provide covering fire, and Morrison began to notice a pattern in the shots. They weren't random. The mysterious marksman was systematically eliminating the most dangerous enemy positions while creating opportunities for the SEALs to maneuver. As Ghost reached the base of the eastern cliff and began his climb, Williams finally managed to establish solid radio contact with their base. The static cleared enough for him to provide a detailed situation report and request immediate air support. However, the response was not what they wanted to hear. Due to political sensitivities in the region, no helicopter gunships or fighter aircraft could be dispatched without approval from higher command levels, and that approval could take hours. Tank moved to support Ghost's climbing attempt by providing suppressive fire toward the enemy positions directly above their teammate. His accurate bursts from his assault rifle forced several fighters to abandon their advantageous positions and seek deeper cover. The hidden sniper seemed to understand Tank's intentions and coordinated his shots to complement the demolitions expert's efforts. Morrison was beginning to develop a theory about their mysterious ally. The precision of the shots, the tactical awareness, and the intimate knowledge of the terrain suggested this was someone with extensive military training. More importantly, the person seemed to understand American military tactics and was anticipating their movements in ways that only someone with similar training could manage. Rookie Thompson had found a position that allowed him to observe more of the northern cliff face where the cave was located. Through his scope, he caught brief glimpses of movement inside the cave, but the person remained carefully concealed. What he did notice was that the hidden sniper was using what appeared to be a high-powered rifle with an advanced scope system. Based on the accuracy and range of the shots, the enemy fighters were becoming increasingly frustrated and disorganized. Their original plan had been to pin down the Americans until reinforcements arrived, but now they were dealing with accurate sniper fire from an unknown position, while also trying to prevent Ghost from reaching their elevated positions. Their commander, wherever he was positioned, seemed to be losing control of the situation. Ghost reached a narrow ledge about 30 feet up the cliff face and found a position that allowed him to see into one of the enemy fighting positions. 3 fighters were huddled behind a rock formation, and one of them appeared to be wounded from the hidden sniper's earlier shots. Ghost carefully aimed his rifle and eliminated all 3 with rapid, precise shots before they could react to his presence. The loss of that position created a gap in the enemy's defensive line that Morrison immediately recognized. He signaled to Tank and Thompson, and the 3 of them began a coordinated advance toward the compound. The hidden sniper seemed to understand their intention and increased the rate of fire to keep the remaining enemy fighters pinned down. As the SEALs moved forward, Morrison got his first clear look at the cave opening, where their mysterious ally was positioned. The entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, and it was partially concealed by carefully arranged rocks and vegetation. Someone had spent considerable time preparing this position, suggesting this wasn't a random encounter but a deliberately planned setup. Williams brought up the rear, maintaining radio contact with their base while monitoring enemy communications. He reported that the insurgent radio chatter had become chaotic, with multiple voices shouting contradictory orders. It was clear that the enemy had lost tactical coordination and was beginning to consider withdrawal rather than continuing the fight. The hidden sniper's next shot was particularly impressive. One of the enemy fighters on the western cliff had positioned himself behind what appeared to be solid cover, but the marksman found a tiny gap in the rocks and placed a shot that eliminated the threat. Thompson, watching through his own scope, shook his head in amazement at the precision required for such a shot. Ghost had continued his climb and reached another enemy position, but this one was empty. The fighters had apparently abandoned it when they realized someone was climbing up from below. He found evidence that at least 5 or 6 enemy combatants had been using this position, including empty ammunition boxes and food, supplies that suggested they had been here for several days. Tank reached the base of a large boulder, formation that provided excellent cover while allowing him to observe the compound ahead. What he saw concerned him greatly. The building showed signs of recent fortification, with sandbags around the entrances and what appeared to be heavy weapons positioned to cover the approaches. Rahman had clearly been preparing for this confrontation for some time. Morrison joined Tank behind the boulder and studied the compound through his binoculars. The intelligence reports had described it as a simple residential structure, but what they were looking at was essentially a small fortress. The enemy had turned their target location into a well-defended stronghold, and the firefight in the past might have been just the opening phase of a much larger battle. The hidden sniper seemed to recognize their new predicament. The rate of fire decreased, suggesting the marksman was conserving ammunition for what might be a longer engagement. Morrison noticed that the shots were now being placed more carefully, focusing on enemy fighters who posed the greatest immediate threat rather than engaging every visible target. Williams received an update from their base that was both good and bad news. A quick reaction force had been dispatched and was en route to their position, but it would still be at least 90 minutes before they arrived. In the meantime, the team was on their own and would need to complete their mission or find a way to survive until reinforcements could reach them. Ghost had found a position high on the cliff that gave him an excellent view of both the remaining enemy fighters and the compound below. He could see movement inside the building, confirming that Rahman and possibly additional fighters were still inside. The target hadn't attempted to escape during the firefight, which suggested either supreme confidence or the presence of valuable resources that he couldn't abandon. Thompson moved to a new position that allowed him to provide covering fire for his teammates while maintaining observation of the mysterious cave. He was determined to get a better look at their hidden ally when the opportunity presented itself. The precision and tactical awareness displayed by this unknown marksman had saved their lives multiple times, and he was curious about who possessed such extraordinary skills. The enemy's return fire had decreased significantly, but Morrison knew better than to assume they had given up. More likely they were regrouping and preparing for a final assault, or waiting for their own reinforcements to arrive. The next phase of the battle would determine whether the SEALs could complete their mission or if they would become casualties in these unforgiving mountains. The explosion created a gaping hole in the compound's eastern wall, sending debris and smoke billowing across the courtyard. Tank rolled away from the blast site and immediately took cover behind a pile of rubble. As automatic weapons fire erupted from inside the building, the defenders had recovered quickly from the shock of the explosion and were now concentrating their fire on the breach point. Morrison signaled for Williams to join Tank at the breach while he moved to provide covering fire from a different angle. The hidden sniper continued to engage targets inside the compound, and Morrison could hear the distinctive crack of the marksman's rifle followed by screams and shouts from the defenders. Each shot seemed to find its mark with deadly precision. Ghost, from his elevated position on the cliff, had an excellent view into the compound through the breach. He could see at least 6 enemy fighters moving inside the building, and one of them matched the description of their target, Khalil Rahman. The bomb maker was barking orders at his men and appeared to be preparing something in what looked like a workshop area filled with electronic equipment and chemical containers. Williams reached the breach and immediately came under heavy fire from a machine gun position inside the compound. The gunner was well protected behind sandbags and had an excellent field of fire covering the breach point. Tank prepared to throw a grenade to eliminate the position, but before he could act, the hidden sniper's rifle cracked once more and the machine gun fell silent. Thompson had moved to a position where he could see into the cave more clearly, and what he observed surprised him greatly. The hidden sniper was indeed a woman, probably in her 30s, with long dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She was wearing simple civilian clothes, but her movements and weapon handling showed extensive military training. Most intriguingly, she appeared to be of Middle Eastern descent, which raised questions about her motivations and allegiances. Tank and Williams entered the compound through the breach, moving in a coordinated pattern that minimized their exposure to enemy fire. The hidden sniper continued to provide supporting fire, taking out defenders who tried to intercept the advancing SEALs. The woman's shooting was becoming even more impressive under pressure, with each shot carefully placed to protect the American soldiers without hitting them accidentally. Ghost spotted Rahman attempting to escape, through a back exit of the compound, and immediately engaged the fighters who were escorting the bomb maker. His shots eliminated 2 of the escorts, but Rahman managed to reach a covered position behind a concrete wall. Ghost radioed the information to his teammates, warning them that their primary target was attempting to flee. Morrison entered the compound and immediately noticed the sophisticated nature of Rahman's operation. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a fully equipped bomb-making facility with chemical storage areas, electronic components, and partially completed explosive devices. The intelligence value of this site would be enormous if they could secure it intact. Williams encountered unexpected resistance from a defender armed with an RPG launcher who was positioned in an upper-floor window. The rocket-propelled grenade missed Williams by inches and exploded against the wall behind him, showering him with concrete fragments. Before the defender could reload, the hidden sniper's bullet found him, and the threat was eliminated. Tank pressed forward toward the area where Ghost had spotted Rahman, but he found himself facing a fortified position that the bomb maker had prepared as a final fallback. The position was protected by steel plates and offered excellent cover, while maintaining fields of fire covering all approaches. Rahman and at least 2 remaining defenders were dug in and prepared for a prolonged fight. Thompson finally got a clear view of the hidden sniper's face through his scope and was shocked by what he saw. The woman's features were familiar, matching the description of Dr. Layla Hassan, a former Syrian military intelligence officer who had reportedly been killed in a government airstrike 2 years earlier. If this was indeed Dr. Hassan, her presence here raised profound questions about the intelligence surrounding this mission. The hidden sniper seemed to sense Thompson's observation and turned slightly toward his position. For just a moment their eyes met through their respective scopes, and she nodded slightly before returning her attention to the compound. The gesture was unmistakably one of acknowledgement and perhaps even greeting, suggesting she knew she was being observed by American forces. Ghost provided Morrison with detailed information about Rahman's fortified position, including the specific layout and the number of defenders. The bomb maker appeared to be destroying documents and equipment, suggesting he knew capture was likely, and was trying to eliminate evidence of his activities. Time was running out if they wanted to take him alive and preserve the intelligence value of his operation. Williams discovered a cache of completed explosive devices in what appeared to be a storage room. The bombs were sophisticated and clearly intended for use against coalition forces. Some of them were already armed and ready for deployment, which explained why Rahman had been so reluctant to abandon this location. The intelligence windfall would be significant if they could secure the facility. Morrison made the decision to use Tank's remaining explosives to breach Rahman's fortified position. It was risky because it might kill their target, but the bomb maker's attempts to destroy evidence suggested that time was more critical than preserving his life. Tank began preparing shaped charges that would direct the blast away from Rahman while eliminating his protective cover. The hidden sniper's rifle cracked once more, and one of Rahman's remaining defenders slumped forward. The woman was systematically eliminating the bomb maker's protection, making it easier for the SEALs to capture him alive. Her tactical coordination with the American team was remarkable, suggesting either extensive knowledge of their procedures or real-time communication that Morrison couldn't detect. Ghost reported movement outside the compound that concerned him greatly. The enemy reinforcements that Williams had detected on radio were approaching the area, and he estimated they would arrive within 10 to 15 minutes. The quick reaction force was still at least 30 minutes away, which meant the SEALs would have to complete their mission and prepare for another firefight, with limited ammunition and resources. Thompson continued to observe Dr. Hassan, if that was indeed who she was, and noticed that she was also monitoring the approaching enemy forces. She appeared to be calculating distances and angles, suggesting she was preparing to engage the reinforcements when they arrived. Her position in the cave would give her excellent fields of fire over the approach routes to the compound. Tank's explosives detonated with a thunderous roar, blowing apart Rahman's protective barriers and filling the area with smoke and debris. Morrison and Williams immediately rushed the position, hoping to capture the bomb maker before he could recover from the blast. The hidden sniper held her fire, apparently recognizing that the Americans needed to take their target alive. Through the smoke and confusion, Morrison spotted Rahman attempting to crawl toward what appeared to be a hidden escape tunnel. The bomb maker was wounded but still mobile, and he was desperately trying to reach safety before the Americans could capture him. This final moment would determine whether their mission was a success or failure. Morrison lunged forward through the smoke and debris, tackling Rahman just as the bomb maker reached the entrance to his escape tunnel. The impact sent both men rolling across the rubble-strewn floor, but Morrison's superior training and physical conditioning gave him the advantage. Within seconds he had Rahman pinned and was applying zip-tie restraints to secure their high-value prisoner. Williams quickly searched the immediate area and found a treasure trove of intelligence materials that Rahman hadn't had time to destroy. Computer hard drives, handwritten notebooks, and detailed maps showing planned attack locations were scattered across the workspace. The intelligence value of this capture would exceed their most optimistic expectations. Tank swept the remainder of the compound to ensure no enemy fighters remained hidden, while Ghost maintained overwatch from his position on the cliff. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the approaching enemy reinforcements meant their extraction would be just as dangerous as their initial assault had been. Thompson lost sight of the hidden sniper as smoke from the explosions drifted across the cave opening, but he could hear the distinctive crack of her rifle as she engaged the approaching enemy forces. Her shots were spaced and deliberate, suggesting she was picking off scouts and advance elements of the reinforcement column to slow their approach to the compound. Morrison dragged the semi-conscious Rahman to a secure area inside the compound and began a rapid field interrogation. The bomb maker was bleeding from several shrapnel wounds but was coherent enough to answer questions. What Morrison learned in those first few minutes would later prove crucial to preventing several planned attacks on coalition forces. Williams established communication with their quick reaction force and provided precise GPS coordinates for the landing zone. The helicopters were still 20 minutes out, but they would need every second to prepare for what was likely to be a contested extraction. Under fire from enemy reinforcements, Ghost spotted the first elements of the enemy reinforcement column moving through the pass below his position. He counted at least 15 fighters armed with assault rifles and RPGs, moving in a coordinated fashion that suggested good leadership and training. The hidden sniper was engaging them from her concealed position, forcing them to take cover and slowing their advance. Tank gathered all the intelligence materials he could carry, while Williams worked to download data from Rahman's computers onto portable storage devices. The workshop contained detailed information about bomb-making techniques, planned targets, and the locations of other terrorist cells throughout the region. This single capture could save hundreds of lives if the intelligence was properly exploited. Thompson watched as the hidden sniper systematically engaged the advancing enemy forces with precision, shots that seemed impossible from her range and angle. Each shot found its mark or came close enough to force the enemy fighters to seek cover, buying precious time for the SEAL team to prepare for extraction. Morrison learned from Rahman that Dr. Layla Hassan was indeed alive and had been working undercover to gather intelligence on terrorist operations in the region. The bomb maker revealed this information reluctantly, apparently believing that Hassan had betrayed him and led the Americans to his location. The truth was more complex than anyone had realized. Ghost reported that the enemy reinforcements had been forced to take a longer route due to the hidden sniper's interdicting fire, which would give them an additional 10 to 15 minutes before the fighters reached the compound. However, he also spotted what appeared to be a larger force moving through a parallel valley, suggesting the enemy had more resources in the area than anticipated. Williams received an update from the Quick Reaction Force that their extraction helicopters were approaching, but would need to land under fire. The pilots were requesting smoke markers to identify friendly positions and were warning that they could only remain on the ground for a maximum of 60 seconds. Due to the enemy threat, Tank set up a defensive perimeter around the compound entrance while Morrison prepared Rahman for transport. The bomb maker was conscious but weak from blood loss, and moving him quickly would be challenging. Thompson continued to provide covering fire while monitoring the hidden snipers, positioned for any opportunity to make contact. The hidden snipers' rifle fell silent as the enemy forces finally reached positions where they could return effective fire toward her cave. Thompson watched anxiously through his scope, hoping to see some sign that Dr. Hassan was safe. But the cave entrance was now obscured by dust and smoke from enemy explosions. Ghost began his descent from the cliff face, using ropes and climbing equipment to reach the compound quickly. The enemy reinforcements were now close enough that his elevated position was becoming untenable, and he needed to rejoin his team for the extraction. His movement drew enemy fire, but the hidden sniper's rifle cracked once more, eliminating the threat. Morrison made the difficult decision to leave some of the intelligence materials behind due to weight and time constraints. They could only carry the most critical items and Rahman himself during the extraction. Williams prioritized the computer drives and documents that appeared to contain the most valuable operational information. The sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the mountain pass as the Quick Reaction Force finally arrived. Tank deployed smoke grenades to mark their position, while Ghost reached the compound and took up a defensive position. The enemy fighters were now close enough to engage the helicopters with small arms fire, making the extraction extremely dangerous. Thompson saw movement at the cave entrance and caught a glimpse of Dr. Hassan as she prepared to leave her position. She appeared to be wounded but mobile, and she was carrying her rifle and what looked like a small pack of personal equipment. For a brief moment, she looked directly at the compound where the Americans were preparing for extraction. Williams coordinated with the helicopter pilots to time their approach with the team's movement to the landing zone. The aircraft would have to land in an open area near the compound that was exposed to enemy fire from multiple directions. The pilots were skilled and experienced, but the landing would require precise timing and coordination. Morrison dragged Rahman toward the designated landing zone, while Tank and Ghost provided covering fire against the approaching enemy forces. The hidden sniper continued to engage targets, but her rate of fire had decreased, suggesting she was either running low on ammunition or had been wounded by return fire. As the helicopters touched down, Thompson made a split-second decision that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Instead of immediately boarding the aircraft with his teammates, he sprinted toward the cave where Dr. Hassan had been positioned. He found her wounded but alive, and she accepted his assistance without hesitation. The extraction was completed under heavy fire, with both the SEAL team and Dr. Hassan safely aboard the helicopters as they lifted off from the compound. Rahman was secured and would provide valuable intelligence in the days that followed. The hidden sniper had revealed herself to be an ally whose intervention had saved their lives and made their mission possible. As the helicopters flew toward safety, Thompson looked back at the mountain pass where they had faced almost certain death just hours earlier. The hidden sharpshooter's skill and courage had turned defeat into victory, and her story would become legend among special operations forces who understood the value of unexpected allies in the world's most dangerous places. The temporary lull in enemy fire gave Morrison a chance to reassess their tactical situation. Ghost had successfully eliminated several enemy positions on the eastern cliff, but at least 4 or 5 fighters remained active on both sides of the pass. More concerning was the compound ahead, which appeared to be much more heavily defended than their intelligence had indicated. Tank studied the fortified building through his scope and identified at least 3 heavy machine gun positions covering the approaches. The sandbag fortifications were professionally constructed, suggesting that Rahman had access to military advisors, or was himself more experienced than they had believed. This wasn't going to be a simple snatch-and-grab operation. Williams continued monitoring enemy communications and reported a troubling development. He was picking up radio transmissions that suggested additional enemy forces were moving toward their position from the south. If those reports were accurate, the SEALs could find themselves caught between the fighters in the pass and fresh reinforcements approaching from behind. The hidden sniper seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. The mysterious marksman began engaging targets more aggressively, taking shots that were more difficult but designed to break up any enemy attempts to coordinate their movements. Morrison watched as shot after shot found its marker came close enough to keep the enemy fighters disorganized and unable to mount an effective counterattack. Ghost had reached the highest accessible point on the eastern cliff and was now in a position to provide overwatch for his teammates below. From his elevated position, he could see the entire battlefield and began calling out enemy movements to help coordinate their advance. His voice crackled through their radio communications, with precise updates about target locations and movement patterns. Thompson found himself in an ideal position to observe the cave where their mysterious ally was positioned. As he watched through his scope, he caught a glimpse of the hidden sniper in action. The person was using what appeared to be a highly modified rifle with an advanced scope system, and their movements suggested extensive military training. What surprised him most was that the figure appeared smaller than he had expected, possibly indicating a woman rather than a man. Morrison made the decision to push forward toward the compound while they still had the advantage created by their hidden allies supporting fire. He signaled to Tank and Williams to begin advancing using a standard leapfrog pattern, with one person moving while the others provided covering fire. The hidden sniper seemed to anticipate their movements and increased the rate of fire to suppress any enemy attempts to interfere with their advance. As the team moved closer to the compound, Tank got a better view of the defensive preparations. The enemy had created overlapping fields of fire that would make a direct assault extremely costly. However, he also noticed that the fortifications were designed primarily to defend against attacks from the pass, not from the elevated positions where Ghost was now located. Williams received another radio update from their base with mixed news. The quick reaction force was making good time through the mountain terrain, but they had also confirmed that enemy reinforcements were indeed moving toward the area. The timeline was becoming critical, and the SEALs needed to complete their mission quickly or risk being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Ghost began engaging targets inside the compound from his elevated position. His shots were forcing the defenders to abandon some of their prepared positions and seek cover deeper inside the building. This created opportunities for his teammates to advance closer to the structure, but it also revealed that there were more fighters inside than they had originally estimated. The hidden sniper's next series of shots demonstrated extraordinary skill and tactical awareness. The marksman systematically eliminated the remaining enemy fighters on the western cliff face with precise shots that came in rapid succession. Each shot was perfectly placed to neutralize the target while avoiding any risk to the advancing SEALs below. Thompson was now close enough to the cave to make out more details about their mysterious ally. Through brief glimpses between shots, he could see that the person was wearing civilian clothing, rather than military gear, which raised questions about their identity and motivations. The rifle being used was definitely military grade, but it appeared to have been extensively modified with custom components. Tank reached a position about 50 meters from the compound and began preparing his demolition charges. His plan was to create a breach in the fortifications that would allow the team to enter the building and capture Rahman. However, the approach would require him to cross open ground under fire from the remaining defenders inside the compound. Morrison coordinated with Ghost to provide covering fire while Tank made his approach. The hidden sniper seemed to understand the plan and began engaging targets inside the compound to suppress return fire. The coordination between the three different firing positions was remarkably effective, creating a complex crossfire that kept the defenders pinned down. As Tank sprinted toward the compound with his demolition charges, enemy fire erupted from multiple positions inside the building. The hidden sniper's response was immediate and devastating. Shot after shot found targets inside the compound, forcing the defenders to abandon their positions and retreat deeper into the structure. Williams had managed to establish communication with Ghost on the cliff. Faison was now coordinating their movements more effectively. The combination of high and low positions gave them excellent tactical flexibility, but they were still outnumbered and running low on ammunition. The hidden sniper's contribution was becoming increasingly critical to their survival. Tank reached the wall of the compound and began placing his charges while Ghost and the hidden sniper provided overlapping covering fire. The enemy fighters inside the building were becoming desperate and started throwing grenades toward Tank's position, but their throws were poorly aimed due to the suppressive fire keeping them pinned down. Thompson moved to a position where he could provide additional covering fire while maintaining observation of the cave. He was becoming increasingly curious about their mysterious ally and was hoping for an opportunity to make contact. The person's shooting skills were extraordinary, and their tactical awareness suggested extensive combat experience. Morrison realized that their hidden ally had been instrumental in turning what should have been a disaster into a potentially successful mission. Without the sniper's intervention, the team would have been pinned down indefinitely or possibly eliminated entirely. The question remained whether this person would reveal themselves once the immediate threat was resolved. The sound of Tank's explosives detonating echoed through the mountain pass, creating a breach in the compound's wall. Smoke and dust filled the air as the SEALs prepared for the final phase of their mission. The hidden sniper's covering fire would be crucial for the next few minutes as they entered the building and attempted to capture their high-value target.